evening and hello and welcome to everyone on this webinar. My name is Davina Rankin and I am one of the National Executive Council members. I represent Scotland and a higher education activist. I'm joined this evening by Helga Ple. Helga is our Senior National Officer in the Health Service Group, and Kebba Manneh. Kebba is Chair of our National Black Members Committee, and Tim Roberts. Tim is our Regional Secretary for UNISON Eastern Region. Before we start, I'd really like to take a few minutes to set the scene. Tackling racism has been a long-term priority for UNISON. Our self-organised groups are at the heart of this work, and it is fully supported by our NEC. We know that the COVID pandemic has had a devastating impact on Black people and our communities. Black workers are at the heart of our public services, providing support and services to the most vulnerable in our society. However, they have been at an increased risk of infection from COVID, with Black men more than 3.3 times likely to die from COVID than white men, and Black women are 2.4 times more likely to die than white women. Despite the risks our Black members faced when they continued to go to work, they did show up day after day, even when they were failed by their employers and the lack of PPE. After the clapping stopped, the UK government rewarded their efforts by attacking the Black Lives Matter movement and denying institutional and structural racism. And they even had the cheek to continue the policy of the hostile environment, which was started under Theresa May many moons ago. We know that racism is historical, structural, and institutional. Only systemic and systematic action will bring change. To paraphrase James Brown, this is a white man's world. Assumptions that are based on the experiences of white men drive so much of our lives, from health to history, from education to employment practices. Black people in our communities are too often seen as an afterthought. At the moment, it could be seen as if we are going backwards in race equality. Last month, the TUC carried out an analysis of figures produced by the Office of National Statistics that showed that since the start of the pandemic, the unemployment rate for Black workers had risen at 3 times the speed of the unemployment rate for white workers. Tonight's event is about how we can come together to tackle institutional racism and make a positive and real change for our members. The format of tonight will be slightly different from the usual panel debate. I'm hoping that it will feel a bit more conversational and it will look as if you're listening into a conversation between 4 senior union activists and what UNISON has been doing to tackle racism and what we can do going forward. So that brings me to the first question, which is going to be directed towards Helga. We know that there are deep-seated problems within the health service for years. What makes you think that health branches can achieve real change now? Helga, the floor is yours.
Well, thanks, Davina. And I can really kind of appreciate the sentiment behind that question. I'm sure everybody watching this can, because we know that the NHS, like so many of the institutions in this country, it's got such deep-seated problems. Perhaps overall the workforce is about commensurate to the community in terms of the black workforce, but the higher up the organisations you go, the less you see Black people in those positions. And we know that experience is different, much more likely to be disciplined, find it much harder to access career development and all of that stuff that we know. So I think what we have heard a lot over the last few years is kind of commitments from the top level about wanting to do something about racism. And in England, we've had the Workforce Race Equality Standard, and that's been collecting data for 5 years. And over the course of that 5 years, glacial improvements on some of the indicators. I mean, like really tiny fractions of percentages in closing those gaps, but not on all the indicators even. So I think it feels like an enormous challenge, and that's why the Health Service Group was really keen to work with the National Black Members Committee to put together stuff that could really break this down and look at practical actions that branches could do. And we wanted to do that with, you know, the 2018, we had the 70th anniversary, Windrush, the NHS closely tied together in all those ways. So I do think there are opportunities now, and we're seeing a lot of health branches doing really good work already, and we're trying to share those as best we can. I'm sure Kebba will talk about that as a health activist as well. But you know, the things you set out at the beginning have really mobilized the desire among members to really kind of stop hearing the warm words and get to the action. So I think we've got that. I think we've got some moves within the NHS itself to say that leaving it to employers and saying, we want you to tackle racism, it's not working. We've seen that it's not actually working. So they are now moving to put some more kind of prescriptive stuff in place. So actually going in and looking at the data and saying, right, you should do this, this, and this to tackle what's going on. And one thing we know about the NHS, they love command and control. If there's a command, it tends to happen. So I think there's an opportunity there for us to kind of really work and push that. And then pick up those actions that really are not about just chatting endlessly about it, but actually what can you do to block bias? How can you change systems so that whatever people think and feel, they're not able to let that bias come out in how processes work. So I think we've got a lot of employers as well that do want to do something, they just don't know how to do it or what to do, and that is a space that health branches that are well equipped, trained, can move into and really organise around and use some of that command and control stuff to actually hang off and get our members involved in shaping that. So we're hoping that the work we're doing on race for equality in health is going to really give people that opportunity just to and we can share what we're doing, we can use webinars and we can use the materials to really take advantage of that.
Thank you for that, because I think it's really important there has to be that involvement of health branches. So we know Kebba is the chair of the National Black Members Committee, but he's also an activist within a health branch within Cymru Wales. And I wondered if you wanted to share your experience as a branch activist about what your biggest win has been to date, tackling racism within the health service.
Thank you very much, Davina. Yes, Helga touched on the basis, and it's very important to build on what she has already illustrated. As a health branch and NHS frontline worker, most of us are working in a clinical setting. It was quite clear earlier on at the start of the pandemic that clinical evidence has spotlighted Black workers and Black people were disproportionately impacted 4 times more likely to die from COVID-19 than white workers and white people. In response to that evidence, our branch, including many UNISON branches across Wales, have called time on the employer to fulfill their statutory duty of care to all workers, particularly Black workers, to provide a safe working environment under the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974. We work with employers, and as Helga already said, there will be employers who know what they are doing. There will be some who are struggling because they haven't have that experience of Black people in their workforce. But what we are able to do in my employer is to workforce mapping exercise took place to identify where Black workers are working, are based, and develop a risk assessment toolkit that was a massive gain for us all. Subsequently, on the 14th of May 2020, you will remember when UNISON organized a webinar titled Black Workers and COVID-19, Addressing the Risk. The risk assessment toolkit that my branch developed and across the Wales as well was presented to the webinar and agreed that a meaningful risk assessment will protect frontline workers, especially Black workers who have disproportionately died from COVID-19, as I've already alluded to. We established comprehensive risk assessment toolkit to protect Black workers, and that is now rolling out across all 12 regions in UNISON. So that is a massive gain for us, and I hope, when it's implemented fully and meaningfully, it will have a tangible outcome for Black workers. Thank you.
Thank you, Kebba. I think that's a really important point, because we have got the Health and Safety Act in place, but quite often it's not reflecting the fact that Black workers have a different experience in the workplace. And I think we do have to make sure toolkits are adapted, especially for that. We started with health, Tim, but as you are Regional Secretary, you work across and you support across all the service groups within UNISON. And I was wondering if you could tell us about some of the initiatives that you've taken forward with other employers that give you hope for a better future for Black workers.
Thanks, Davina. I think what struck me from what Helga and Kebba said is just how fundamentally, when our work on race equality is core fundamental UNISON work. It's not an add-on. It is why we exist as a trade union. And so, looking across the sectors, I mean, our unions work on social care is hugely important. Poor practice in social care sector didn't start when COVID began to spread. It is endemic. It is the lowest paid. One of the lowest paid sectors in the UK, rife with poverty pay, underinvestment in the staffing, no training, poor health and safety. 3 out of 4 care workers do not earn the living wage, and we know that the problems in the social care workforce disproportionately affect Black workers. Approximately 25% of the care workforce are Black, significantly more than the working adult population. And for us, building the union in social care isn't easy, but it's vital work. And what is clear is that when we organise in social care, we tackle race equality. When we secure the living wage as a trade union, when we get proper sick pay, it means more money going into all workers' pockets, but disproportionately Black workers' pockets as well. When we secure union recognition in these shoddy employers, we achieve fairer, more equal workplaces. And when we build our activist base in social care, we almost by definition get more Black activists. The majority of new activists that's come forward in the Eastern region in the last 12 months have come forward as a result of our social care organising. And when we look across the kind of the core public sector, I know we're a public services trade union, but when looking at the core public sector employers, we can see that the energy released by the Black Lives Matter movement in the last 12 months has seen a significant number of employers either wanting to work with us as a trade union to deliver race equality, or at best, it wants to give the impression that they want to work with us to achieve race equality. And whether their intentions are true or not, it opens the door for us as a trade union to deliver the change that our workers need. As Helga said, the stats within the public sector have been poor, and they've been poor for a very long time. So we don't need to prove that racism exists. We know that racism exists, and often our employers know that racism exists. And what is clear to me is that when we have organized Black workers demanding change, that's when we win. Yeah, organized, unionized Black workers. There's an employer in our region who are producing their equality stats in a very rose-tinted way, and they're ashamed into producing better statistics by the Black workers group. We've got a mental health branch in our region who was able to push the employer to produce its equality stats, not just for its workers receiving a disciplinary sanction, but for those entering into a disciplinary process. And what we could see is that the proportion of workers, Black and white, receiving a sanction was about the same, but there was a massive overrepresentation of Black workers entering the disciplinary process. And it was the branch that's got additional safeguards and checks which HR has to go through before disciplinary processes are started. That benefits Black workers, but ultimately that benefits all workers. So that's another really good example. Recently, we've got a health trust as well that's been agreeing to give paid time off for UNISON members to attend their own Black workers group, not the trust BAME network, but the UNISON Black workers group. That's really positive. And then only last week we had a university agree to give the branch Black members office a 1-day a week facility time purely to organise and mobilise Black workers around the race equality agenda. We're succeeding as a union. There's a lot more for us to do, but we need to be clear that we succeed when black workers lead the fight.
Thank you, Tim. I'm actually going to ask you a supplementary question, which you've not had forewarning of, but I thought it was a really interesting point that you made about totally the statistics are there, there's no denying it, and yet I still find employers who are in denial about the extent of the problem. And it's, do you have any thoughts about how we could tackle that? Because quite often it's really good when employers do acknowledge a problem, but other times you are literally banging your head off a brick wall for them even to accept racism in their workplace. I don't know if you've had thoughts. I mean, I open it up to Kebba and Helga if you want to join in as well, but what can we do if there's that institutional pushback about tackling racism in the workplace?
I mean, what's worked particularly in the Eastern region is when we just sort of take it over and out of the normal collective bargaining processes and structures, which the employers want to bog us down into. So of course we raise that, but we've been raising it for years. So we're clear that we try and set up black workers groups to identify the issues which impact on them. We make sure it's the black workers that are asking the questions. Sometimes the black workers infiltrate and take over the employers black network. Sometimes we do it as ourselves. It's whatever works in each workplace, but black workers need to be saying it and demanding that. And then as a union, we can't be afraid of rocking the boat of partnership working and saying that if we don't get the change that we need, we will go external to the employer. And actually very few of our employers, particularly the core public sector employers, want to have their black workers naming and shaming them in the local press, and it's something which the threat at least does seem to open some doors. I don't know what Helga and Kebba have got to say about that too.
I think you hit the nail on the head, Tim. I hope Helga don't mind me coming in first. Just thank you. I think you hit the nail on the head, Tim, because at the end of the day, if we are organized in our workplaces, we are stronger together. And that organizing don't necessarily mean that we have to stick by the structural way of organizing in terms of in workplace. We can take it outside in the community that we live and work. So by coming together and yes, we will do a collaborative working, because partnership working usually produce a collaborative outcome. A good example of that is what I've already alluded to in terms of risk assessment, identifying clinical evidences here. This is what is happening now. Black people are dying. Why? Can we do something about it? Oh, we got, I don't know, 20,000 employees. We cannot do that because we are mapping exercise. You've got a duty of care to provide safe working environment for all your employees, especially Black workers. So when you come from those kind of perspectives and illustrate that there are legal obligations, they sometimes tend to listen and say, okay, then how can we do this in a collaborative way? And the result for that is the risk assessment that was developed in the branch and then across Wales, and then bring it to the UNISON HQ for UNISON adapting it and put it into a website for others to benefit from it. But it's down to that partnership working and demanding and asking and go on and on and on and try to organize around the issue. Because if you haven't got an issue to organize around, it became a little bit harder to organize. But you've got an issue, then you organize around that issue is a way forward, I think. Thank you. I don't want to hog the place. Helga, yes.
I mean, you've both said it. I mean, I think it's that voice, isn't it? The lead, as you said, Davina, they can look at statistics, and you can always explain away a statistic. You can say, oh, but it doesn't take account of this or that. But if there are ways to confront those decision makers with the people the voices, that really does work. You know, whether you can kind of ambush a board member, or I don't know, lots of different ways of doing it. But also, even with statistics, one thing they do not like is the kind of idea of the league table. So it's like they always like to think, oh, if we're slightly not as bad as the next employer, but actually, you know, that's really not good enough. So I think there are lots of different ways that we can overcome that and just you know, avoid that sort of hiding behind being average, you know, because average isn't good enough if everybody's got these gaps and disparities on race issues.
Davina, if I can quickly add that if you don't know the problem, you don't understand the problem, how can you genuinely address that problem? It's not possible. So this is an argument we have to put to the employer. You have to be able to understand the problem, whether you agree with it or not, but you have to be able to understand it, appraise it 360 degrees, to have a fuller understanding of the level and the energy that will go into that solving that problem. So I think that is very important for us to use that to say, here is the problem, here's the size of the problem, let's address it rather than you are in denial or put your head in the sand. I don't know.
And I think that's a really strong point, because it links back to something that Helga said right at the start about the lack of Black people in senior positions within the public sector, because this is not their lived experience. So we do need Black workers to be organised and actually speaking the truth to management, because if we do not say it, they will have no idea of what is actually going on. And I think there's a really strong place for that organising, that sort of community organising, if we can't go through the normal routes. But that does bring me to a question for Helga, and it's about the more structured approach to negotiations. And it applies to any employer, but obviously, Helga, you work within the health sector. How do we integrate race equality into our bargaining agenda, in particular health, but if you wanted to maybe comment on anything else?
Yeah, I mean, I think from already from the conversation, there's so much commonality between sectors on this stuff, isn't there? I mean, it's just really right across the public services. And I think Tim talked about it in his earlier remarks about kind of making sure we don't see equality issues as kind of separate and alongside bargaining, and how it's easy to say, but actually how do we really discipline ourselves to do that all the time? So I think there's sort of four things really. One is about who's involved in shaping the bargaining agenda. And again, you've touched on it, Tim, about that, you know, organised black workers groups and all that, but then making sure that those groups are then a source for people to get involved across the board. So, you know, we've had such a focus on health and safety reps, haven't we, through this pandemic, but we need to be focusing on Black health and safety reps who understand those issues and can advocate and pick up those issues. We need Black JE reps, we need, you know, Black people in staff side chair positions, Black pension leads, all of that needs to be open and accessible, and removing any barriers that are there for people to get involved in that. So if we've got that, we know that we're doing bargaining in a representative way. Secondly, then it's about what our priorities are. So if we prioritise measures that benefit everybody, but will particularly address Black workers' issues. So every time we prioritise low pay, every time we do a pay claim or a pay negotiation that looks at, you know, bottom loading the pay award for the lowest paid, that's going to benefit Black workers more proportionately. So making sure that we're always looking for those positive action measures. And then the third thing is like being more systematic to look at where are the spaces and the areas where bias creeps in, where stuff happens in workplaces that creates bias. So, you know, when we're looking at policies, anything that has kind of management discretion, you know, that will produce inequalities. So if it's performance related pay, we know that those outcomes are always worse for not just Black workers, but for women, for LGBT plus members, for disabled members. So, you know, can we root out areas where there's discretion? Can we have kind of things that are labeled, and can we have vetting of decisions and checking decisions that are made for those unequal outcomes, and you know, looking at where you have a good policy but practice looks really different. And that's what, you know, trade union activists are really good at finding those things, aren't they? It's like, well, the policy says we will recruit in this way, but actually, isn't it really weird that over here we've got all these people and they're all kind of related to each other and nobody else gets in there? So I think being really systematic about that. And then the final one, equality impact assessment, is something that I think if we can get better at intervening on those early, because I don't know about you, but often when you see those though and they're done by an employer, they're terrible. They're absolutely awful. They do not at all address the issues. They just go, well, this is bad, but it's bad for everyone, so that's fine. And it's, you know, if we can be much better at just calling that out. So I'm thinking of some of the work that we've done around kind of outsourcing. And in the NHS, we had all these subsidiary companies, a couple of branches, Bradford and Frimley, where they really took it to those board members and said, you're looking at this outsourcing, these are the workers it will affect, look at them. And you can see that this is disproportionately Black workers that will be affected and will have their terms and conditions cut. If we can get in early enough and really challenge them on that equality output, I think that's another way that we can really force organisations to look things in the eye before they do them and maybe change at that point. And often it's too late by the time we're able to do that. So I think those are my kind of 4 things that came to mind on that one.
Thank you, Helga. Kebba, the National Black Members Committee draws on reps from across the UK and Northern Ireland and across the service groups. I was just to see, what are the National Black Members Committee's priorities on bargaining for race equality?
Simply to build on what Helga has already illustrated is important. For us, is holding employers accountable for ongoing work on risk assessment and risk reduction measures for Black workers. We will pursue and push for change where the race equality frameworks used by employers, the UK government, and of course the devolved governments are not effective. We will work closely between UNISON branches, regional Black Members Committee, and other Black staff networks across UK, encouraging joint working between regional service group committees to plan and deliver activities that underpins the objective of the Race for Equality campaign, which is very worthy campaigning. And the National Black Members Committee have been part and parcel of the Race for Equality campaign since its inception. So for us, is if you like, is our baby. We really, really embrace that, and we want to take that further into branches, community as well, community settings, because we know in the community settings, if we are well organized, we can get a result. And a good example of that is here in Wales. UNISON in the community, well organized, we are able to convince the Wales government to teach Black history as part of the national curriculum all year round, not just month of October. So for us, it's important to be able to achieve something and say, well, we planned this come to our regional committee motion, and the motion is carried. Now then, what do? We take it to the community, and we did. We take it to the community, we organize, and in the end, we make sure that we lobby all of our assembly members and stuff like that. So UNISON was very, very focused and minded the outcome we want to get out of this by working with community groups. And I'm really pleased when you all know now the Black history is going to be taught as part of the national curriculum in Wales. Wouldn't it be wonderful if UNISON is able to do that across the 12 regions, eh? And it will be a wonderful thing. But here is a good illustration for UNISON to pursue a little bit later on. And pursue the government to make ethnicity pay gap. That's another thing we want to look at, and to say that reporting mandatory is in place, which should be accompanied by an action plan, setting out what the organization is going to do to close the ethnicity pay gap. Very, very important, because it's not fair and it's not right that same people doing the same job, but one get higher, higher pay just because of the the color of their skin. I cannot say how that's fair, you know, or ethical or moral. You know, I can go on and on and on, but I will leave it a space for Tim to come in if he chooses so. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kebba. I think what we've seen is the need to link in priorities with organising and campaigning. And I wondered, Tim, if you'd like to reflect over the last 18 months or so, which have been really unusual and really challenging and really difficult, to reflect on what we've been through in the past 18 months and maybe tell us what's been particularly effective in terms of organising Black workers during the pandemic.
Thanks, Davina. What's interesting is the pandemic, because of the nature of the pandemic, it kind of forced us as a trade union to work out how we can do online organising and online meetings probably for the first time. And whereas personally, I hope I never have to do a Zoom quiz ever again. Professionally, as an organizer, I know that online meetings have helped us reach members which we hadn't reached before, despite our best efforts. And within the Eastern region, we've developed like a model for online black workers meetings, and just doing them online reaches more members. So Hertfordshire County branch, you know, our largest branch in the region, members spread across over 500 different employers. They're now having black workers meetings with between 20 and 40 members attending every single time. There's no way that any branch in our region would have ever delivered that as a standard black workers meeting if it was face to face. And we have members that wouldn't attend a physical meeting because they couldn't fit it into their time along with traveling time, but now can attend, and people organising their work breaks so they can log into the meeting during work. People are logging in while they're walking home or on the bus. But you know, people, let's be honest, mothers generally logging into the meetings while they are cooking their kids' tea, and actually being able to reach out and see access more black workers generally, but black women in particular has been a real success. So our meetings, our branch or local meetings, sometimes they're one branch, sometimes they're all the branches in one county. Those online meetings are strictly for like 1 hour, not a minute over. They're no more frequent than 6 weeks. Each meeting has a specific topic, whether it's around equality legislation, the union's race protocol, whether the union structures, or some skills-based activity like improving job applications or managing stress. And then we have a topic for like no more than 20 minutes, and then we have a general discussion about it afterwards, followed by a short discussion about what's going to happen in future meetings. We don't spend our time looking at minutes. We don't spend our time looking at matters arising. We actually want to make sure is that when workers engage in those meetings for the first time, they can see that the union and those union meetings are relevant to their lived experiences as black workers. And that's actually helped us. Being strict with around our approach has helped us reach out to more black workers than we've ever done before. And we've seen not only more engagement, but we've seen greater confidence in our black activists coming forward.
Thank you, Tim. There's been really good contributions in this segment, so I've got some follow-up questions which all of you can chip in or ignore. And I think firstly, Kebba's point about the ethnicity pay gap monitoring and publishing and an action plan. So there's really two thoughts. The first one being, obviously, we have had legislation to tackle the gender pay gap on the books for some time, and at the current rate of progress, it'll be another 200 years before our descendants might actually achieve parity in the workplace. So my question really is, obviously legislation isn't enough, and I'm actually a big fan of huge sanctions. I think if an employer cannot cut the pay gap, whatever, if it's ethnicity or disability pay gap or gender pay gap, if they can't cut it, they should be fined. Huge fine. Another point would be about mandatory involvement of the trade unions in action planning and monitoring going forward. So what do my guests think for that? I might just be one of the extreme weirdness on the fringe of this, but I have been fighting the gender pay gap for some time, and I have been involved in trying to get higher education to tackle this ethnic pay gap as well. So what do you think would be the sort of, do you prefer a carrot approach or a stick approach or a mixture? Open to my guests.
I think the stick is important, and I think it certainly, speaking from a kind of health perspective, it kind of goes back to that thing I was touching on earlier about systems that respond to kind of you know, prescription or kind of clear instructions. And I kind of share your view about where the emphasis is. Is it on just the reporting, and as long as you've reported and ticked a box, that lets you off the hook, or is it more about shifting the emphasis onto the actual action plan, the contents of that? Because we kind of do know the things that work. Like, we know that if you kind of de-bias your recruitment systems, there's a lot that can be done to make sure that, you know, people are getting through from shortlisting and getting those higher paid jobs. We kind of know as well that you know, that so many opportunities are kind of informal, and like, people get the opportunity to do a secondment or do a special project. Who gets you hear it time and time, you know, black members will say, I never even heard about that. You know, it's the tap on the shoulder. So really sort of getting much more of the focus on the action plan, and almost like, if you haven't got this in your action plan, you know, there's going to be a consequence. Feels like where it should be going. But I suppose there is something about saying, if the reporting isn't even mandatory, then, you know, it does feel like it's deprioritized. But I'm really share your view about, like, how can we put the emphasis on the action plan and being really accountable for that, because that doesn't feel like that's been cracked yet, really.
Thanks, Kebba.
I think if I can come in and just add a little bit of a comment on, I think our Tim mentioned lived experience. And I just want to draw on that lived experience. We've already, has trade unions campaigned for gender pay gap. And that has more or less successful, if you like. It's getting better, put it that way. And I think we can use the same experience and either use the carrot and stick approach, you know, or we can say, how did we do that? How did we, back in 5 years or 10 years ago, how did we articulate this issue as a problem in terms of gender pay gap? Did we name and shame? Did we use baseball bat? Did we use, you know, whatever we use, it's important to learn from that and say, yes, we can apply the same concepts and principles in achieving our objective of race, ethnicity pay gap. I think that's very important in moving forward.
Sam, would you like to add?
Yeah, I just think we just need to be conscious that, you know, the stick isn't going to get anywhere soon. Yeah, so because of the actions of our shameless Tory government that's deprioritised equalities, defunded the Equality and Human Rights Commission, watered down the public sector equality duty, actually we are not going to get the enforcement around some of this stuff. So we're going to need to be clear about what we need as a union. And actually the only solution, nobody, no sector, no employer has given black workers equality just because we've asked for it. Yeah, so we have to fight for it. We have to demand it. Everything that we talked about already. We have to organize. We have to get busy on it. And actually, what we know is that a lot of our black workers unfortunately accept it. They just say this is the way it is in our country. So it's not just around organizing. It's around educating. It's around agitating. This isn't easy work for us. Yeah, this isn't easy work. But it's work which we have to do, and work which we know that as a union we can deliver. So when it's clear about, I mean, you know, it's, as Helga said, it's not just around reporting the gaps. It's actually about pushing our employers to do something about it, because we don't just need them to report every year. And actually, only when we exercise industrial muscle as a trade union, as the largest trade union in this country, can we start to get employers to shift on this? But we can't wait for the government to use its stick, because until we're successful in electing a progressive Labour government, we're not going to get that.
No, and I think it's a really important point. It's about organising. Somebody once said that nothing worth achieving is easy to do. And I think it's a long, hard battle. And I think Kebba's right. We can learn from the gender pay gap work, which is still not progressed as far as we'd like. But I do think, I give the example as a university in England who published its gender pay gap, and it worked out that women effectively stopped being paid about October of each year because the gender pay gap was so big. And the principal, who happened to be a female, when challenged by the BBC, said, well, you know, women do cleaning and catering, it's just low paid work. And it's like, it's a bit challenging narrative. So it is low paid, but actually it's a skilled work, and therefore our workers deserve a decent pay. And I think that's maybe where we have to take this. And I do think there's a place for UNISON to be at the forefront of that fight, because like you say, Tim, unless the workers fight back, employers will get away, or think will get away with doing the minimum. And I think there's a place for enhanced equality impact assessments, because it's interesting where the legislation lies across the devolved nations, where we've got stronger protection, for example, in Scotland, as opposed to England, unfortunately. And I think that's going to be a challenge for a national union about how we can progress this as a strong collective. Helga, your question. We've talked about organising Black workers quite a lot, but recognising there is a significant proportion of the workforce, i.e. our white colleagues. So how can we go about organising white members to tackle racism alongside the Black workers? Allyship is a popular concept, and it can mean different things to different people. How do you see UNISON progressing this concept within tackling racism?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Sort of following the kind of debates and discussions about allyship, different types of allyship, what that looks like, and how you can develop that. It's certainly something that's being actively talked about in the kind of NHS sort of leadership circles. I mean, for me, it's sort of like the first thing that comes to mind is like we call it solidarity, don't we? I mean, it's a trade union word that we're all much more comfortable with, I think, and we understand, and it's in us, and it sets what we do. So I feel like there's that, and then there's also in public services by definition has to be a lot of emphasis on team working. Teams deliver good public services, you know. And you were talking about what's a university if it doesn't have its cleaners and its caterers? You know, all of those things for me feels like the starting point. So how can you have a good team if some members of that team feel excluded, othered, not as valued, and so on? So for me, if the thing that when we were thinking about this in the service group was around one of the most common things that you know, Black health workers will talk about is like when they're getting racist abuse from patients or from service users, and that feeling that their colleagues don't say anything, they just don't say a word, and that how that feels time and time again for that to happen. And we know some branches have done really good work. So North Bristol with their racism red card thing, which has won awards, and so is a brilliant example of actually saying that, you know, that really isn't good enough. But I think perhaps we need to delve more into the issues behind that. So why is that? Why would you stand by and not say anything as a white member of that team when you see that happening? And it's similar with line managers will often say, oh well, you just have to, or you have to put up with it, or worse even, that it will say the patient can have somebody else deal with them, which is completely unacceptable. So I feel like that feels like a way into this, and we need to talk about this stuff more as well. I mean, we really do need to be able to have the conversations about, you know, what is it that people, what gets in the way? Why is it lack of confidence, not know what to say? How do we kind of start talking about these things, but how do we actually, as a union, we can organise around that. We can use, you know, ways of bringing people together and saying, we'll all call this out. We know how to do it, and we know what to do. And we can just play a little bit of a role to prompt that by perhaps providing some materials, kind of pledges, or any things that just people just automatically go to in the heat of that moment. Is just like, no, we're one team, and that's our sort of slogan in health. We're one team. Well, that applies in terms of race issues as well. I mean, there's a whole lot more to it than that, but I kind of feels like a place that we could start with this and make it really tangible.
Thank you. I mean, I think that leads nicely into Kebba, which is around, you've talked about the support and training for white colleagues to challenge racism, and UNISON does have a training package which is challenging racism in the workplace, which is just about to be relaunched as an online course. Kebba, could you tell us a bit more about the course, what it covers, and who should attend, perhaps?
Yes, Davina, of course, I understand regions will be advertising the course on their website too. The course certainly is aimed at branch activists that are involved in negotiations with their employer and hold a position in the branch that has the remit and authority to take forward a branch strategy and action plan on challenging racism in the workplace. The course is designed to be run on a branch by branch basis, as I understand it, or where this is not practicable, with groups of branches that can come together with at least 2 reps from each branch to enable them to work together to develop an action plan based on their own employers' experience. I also understand that regional organizers and area organizers for the particular branches will also attend the course as an active participants. And on the layers, that is UNISON Learning Organization, as I forgot what it stands for, but and so if you look onto the chat, somebody, colleagues will describe what LEOS stand for. They have a site, and the regional educational team website is, I think it's learning.wales.org or learning.unison.org.regions-education, and the information is there. So, you know, people can tap into that and look at what is happening in their area and get organized. And the more we are organized and structured in terms of moving this forward, it is a good thing. Challenging racism has been around for a long time for those of us who are familiar with the concepts and principles of it. And we will continue to uphold and to take on employers who are, you know, not adhering to what we all illustrated, both Tim and Helga and yourself, Davina, in terms of their responsibility, their lawful responsibility. And this is what we have to come back to. They do have a lawful responsibility, especially places like under the Equality Act 2010. We mentioned about the equality impact assessment. What does that look like when you actually do it properly? And some, I don't know whether it's actually mandatory in England yet, because they haven't enacted other aspect of it. And I think that's also part of our campaign to ensure that it is enacted. 2010 Equality Act Impact Assessment is enacted throughout of UK, but certainly in Wales, that's our experience. We press on employer to ensure that, you know, we equality impact assess the policy, the procedure. Sometimes it works straight away. Yeah, we know we'll do this straight away. They will do it themselves. But there are times, you know, we have to get organized and push and push on that particular issue. Hope that's helpful to those of us who are not familiar with challenging racism in the workplace. Thank you.
Thank you, Kebba. I think that's very useful, and hopefully we can encourage our activists across the UK to take up that opportunity with it being online. We've talked quite a lot this evening about Black workers. And I think in the chat we've had the link to what UNISON defines Black as, because we talk about Black workers because we see it's a unifying term that can bring us together to tackle racism. But we also recognise it's a very broad brush. So Tim, how can we acknowledge intersectionality in our work? Someone has posted a comment about recognising neurodiversity, for example, in a workplace, but we also recognise that we organise Black LGBT plus workers, Black women, Black workers with disabilities. Can you tell us about an example from your region about recognising intersectionality in the work you've undertaken?
Yeah, thanks, Davina. I mean, what we all know is that Black workers, whatever their age, whatever their job, whatever their sector, survive racism in many different ways in our country. But how that racism manifests itself is it doesn't happen in a uniform way. So we know, for example, that the racist immigration system that we have in this country fuels a hostile culture, sometimes inadvertently, often deliberately, which impacts on all Black workers generally. But there are a range of very specific effects it has on Black workers who are not British nationals. And as a trade union, we've always understood that actually there are specific issues facing our Black migrant workers. One of the most shocking examples for me is the health surcharge, which means that we have UNISON members having to pay hundreds of pounds each year to pay for their right to receive healthcare, even those workers that work in day out in the NHS and actually deliver that healthcare. Now that is an issue which actually many British-born Black workers don't know about, and if we didn't as a union understand and try and unpick kind of intersectionality, what are the specific issues, we wouldn't have picked it up. And in our region, well, in parts of our region, in Hertfordshire and Bedfordshire, last year we ran 4 briefings specifically for migrant workers on the health surcharge. We had nearly 147 Black workers attend those meetings, those 4 meetings. Most of those were UNISON members already, and they were really happy that their union was doing something specifically for them. They could see that. But for those who weren't members already, they joined, because again, around recruitment and retention, it's 2 sides of the same coin. Workers want their trade unions to be doing stuff on issues which are important to them and their working lives. We were able to pick up a huge amount of casework relating to that surcharge, which and actually made a difference to those people's lives. 4 of the members that attended those meetings are now activists, so that's kind of an organizing success, and it linked into our campaigning agenda because we got some really specific examples of the egregiousness of that surcharge, which the national union used as part of their national campaigning work. And that's just one example. But we also know we know, for example, around the menopause and how the menopause affects Black women in a different way, and how that is fundamentally a workplace issue. And that's another example that actually when we as a trade union, we are pushing forward the menopause agenda, but we always need to make sure about how it impacts particularly on Black women, just as it impacts differently on disabled women. So I'm very proud to be part of a trade union which actually embraces the intersectionality of equalities issues and the fact that it's core to union work.
Thank you, Tim. We're actually coming to the end of our conversation. So I have one final slightly tweaked question to everyone. So I'm looking for short and snappy answers so we can get all 3 of you in. What do you think we should learn from the last 18 months? And what should UNISON prioritise going forward? And my little addition is we have heard about the importance of organising. We have heard about the importance of our union taking up the issues that matter most to our members. But how can we make our leadership more reflective of our membership as well? So how do we get those organised Black workers to then rise up and actually take up leadership roles, both locally regionally and nationally. So what is the priority going forward, and how can we get more Black workers into leadership so our union better reflects our membership? Helga, I'm going to start with you.
Oh, crikey. It's a bit of a challenge to do that short and snappy. So I mean, I think just drawing from Tim's last answer there around just, you know, showing that we're relevant, that we understand the issues, that we pick the issues up and make the links and show that we're committed, we're there for that journey. We like you said, we've got a hell of a hostile environment, not only on sort of immigration issues, but much more generally on race. So showing that we're willing to kind of tackle those issues, talk about them, stick with it. Some of this stuff takes a long time to kind of really dismantle, and I think that's really key to doing that. I think in terms of prioritization of what we do, I mean, the pandemic sort of has really shown a lot of different things, but certainly importance of the work people do and how that not only impacts on their well-being, but their health, their life chances, family life chances, when we're looking not just in health, social care, transport, all those areas where people work, and that link between work and how, you know, whether that's casualization, low pay, hostile environment, and all the dynamics of that. So it's what we do is so relevant, and given we've got the hostile Westminster government, the work that we can do to embed change in systems that so that we can tie it down through collective agreements, through policy changes that we can effect in workplaces. If we're not going to get those legislative changes, as you were saying, Tim, that will be so difficult. That seems to me a massive priority for us. And just picking up on what Kebba was talking about in terms of the risk assessment, we've done so much work around that. I really want to make sure that we kind of follow that through and build on that, not just in terms of the pandemic situation, but taking the learning from that and making sure that that's something that's built in, and that the many employers for the first time actually took an interest in Black workers and what their particular issues and experiences were. Let's make sure that that wasn't just while their lives were at risk, but that is something much bigger than that. Sorry, wasn't short and snappy, I'll shut up.
It's fine, Helga. Kebba?
I'm not going to do so snappy on this one, Davina. I'm going to do you justice. So I'm going to put it into context or toss the coin.
No,
Put it into context. It is very important. It is rather important for us all to learn that racism is real and continues to impact significantly on Black workers and Black people in and outside of the workplace and across the world. That's very important. That George Floyd's death created a domino effect that has ensued. We took a stance and shouted louder and clear that Black lives matter, and we are no longer going to die without any justice being done. So we should be calling for mandatory risk assessment for Black workers, just to follow on what Helga has already illustrated, with risk addressed effectively and mandatory spot check and sanction by health and safety executive inspectors. Very important. They've got that lawful responsibility to do that part of their statutory role. We also look for a mandatory ethnicity pay gap reporting that we have to achieve, and indefinite leave to remain for all key workers who are working on the COVID-19 frontline. Very important principle. We should be able to measure, to implement a national race equality strategy working alongside the TUC and the Racist Task Force. And finally, to look for guarantee access to skill, training opportunities and apprenticeship for our young unemployed people, particularly to include young Black people who are not in education, employment, or training. Thank you, Davina, for allowing me to illustrate all of these points.
Kebba, that was short and snappy when we're talking about tackling racism. So thank you, Tim. That gives you a chance.
I mean, we didn't learn it this year, but for me, it was certainly been reaffirmed this year, is that our union is at the strongest when we have black workers in leadership roles. That's the fundamental point for me. And black members make great black members officers, but they make really good health and safety officers, conveners, branch chairs, treasurers, secretaries, regional conveners, and, as Davina knows, NEC members. Yeah, so that it is really, really important that across the board, black workers take those leadership roles, and it is the responsibility of the union to nurture, to encourage, to train, to agitate, to organise, to advise. I talked briefly about the County Black Workers Group. It met in Hertfordshire. It met in August last year because of the intensive work. By the time of the AGM in February this year, 6 months later, we had 5 new workplace reps trained. We had the branch vice chair, the branch black members officer, and the branch international officer. They were all people that attended their first meeting 6 months ago, and they were nourished through self-organisation. So self-organisation does make a difference. That's what sets us apart as a trade union. And one of the last thing that I'm going to talk briefly about is within our region, we have every single year we have a weekend residential development and education weekend, which is only aimed at black activists, and it's all about growth. It's all about what else can we do collectively to make a difference. And I'd hope these kind of initiatives can be rolled out across the union.
Thank you, Tim. I think you've no Kebba, because we are now over. I should have warned you all. I'm quite a strict chairperson, so no. I would love if we could talk all night, because it is such a really important topic, and we could have arranged a 2-hour webinar and we would have still ran out of time. We are now a minute over, so I get the last word, and it's a really simple word, which is thank you. Thank you to the panelists who came and shared their experience, their expertise. Thank you to the audience who gave up their evening to join us and to hopefully find it as interesting as I have this evening. And a special thank you to all the staff who have made this webinar possible. So just to name a few: Susan, Gloria, Margaret, Caroline, Carola, Karen, and Susan, who have either organised the seminar or have been providing, for example, speech to text or BSL to make this as accessible as possible. A huge thank you for you all. And my final word, honestly, is good night to everyone, and I hope you all stay safe. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Diolch.